Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Millennials Are Killing Capitalism Live. It is good to be with you this afternoon, or for one of our guests this evening, or this morning, wherever you are. Um, Today, obviously, we're going to be talking a lot about a variety of different things. I mean, it's been I don't know. It always seems longer than it actually is, but I think it's been about a month since Lara and I have done an episode. It has been the last thing I did with Stephen Sheehi was actually in person in Philadelphia with Lara back in, I think that was July. And so anyways, it's been a while since we've had a conversation, and then even in the context of talking about Palestine, there's been so much that has happened within the last month. And also, obviously, we're going to be talking about Lebanon quite a bit today. And then, of course, yesterday happened. So we will be talking about Iran, and we will be talking about, U.S. imperialism and, Zionist ambitions and all of those kinds of things. Um, so, anyways, two folks that I'm always just it's a pleasure to be in conversation. It's an honor to be in conversation with them always. Um, of course, take a minute, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you have not. We'll probably cross over 8,000 threshold, 8,000 subscribers during this episode. So we have a little party about that. And yeah, become a member or support us on Patreon. Really appreciate any way that people can support the show, but more importantly than that, share this conversation with other folks. I'm sure there will be some really important analysis that people need to hear, and as people have been accustomed to with my conversations with Dr. Lara Sheehi and also with Dr. Stephen Sheehi. So I'm not going to do lengthy introductions today, but as folks know, Lara Sheehi is an assistant professor of clinical psychology, is a director of, actually, I think this is a dated bio that I have for her. Let me get a new bio. Hang on one second. I'll do Stephen's while I'm doing that. So Stephen Sheehi is the Sultan Qaboos Professor of Middle East Studies at William and Mary, where he also directs the Decolonizing Humanities Project. His scholarship engages the long tentacle of empire colonialism, racial capitalism, and cis-het normativity in the Arab world and the global north. Among his recent books are Psychoanalysis Under Occupation, which is co-authored with Lara Sheehi, Camera Palestina, Photography and the Displaced History of Palestine and Islamophobia, the Ideological Campaign Against Muslims. Now, let me pull up one second here. Lara Sheehi is an assistant professor of clinical psychology at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies in Qatar. She is the founding faculty director of the Psychoanalysis and the Arab World Lab. Lara's work takes up decolonial and anti-oppressive approaches to psychoanalysis with a focus on liberation struggles in the global south. She is the co-author of the book I just mentioned, Psychoanalysis Under Occupation, Practicing Resistance in Palestine, and is working on a new book, From the Clinic to the Street, Psychoanalysis for Revolutionary Futures. Welcome back to Millennials Are Killing Capitalism to both of you. It's good to be with you both.
Thank you.
Let's bring it over 8,000.
Apparently we hit it already. So that's great. Yeah, thank you everybody, and thank you for letting me know. Renee, good to see you. We have to get this up, but we're doing, I think I can announce this now. So Friday and Saturday, we're going to do a 2-part collaboration. Renee Johnston, Saturdays with Renee from Black Liberation Media. Myself, Jared Ball is going to join us as well, and Geechee Ya from Black Liberation Media. And then I believe Hiram Rivera is going to join us on Saturday, but not on Friday. So anyways, really good people, and really looking forward to that discussion, both parts. So we'll do Friday at 11 a.m. and then Saturday at 11 a.m. One will be here. So Friday will be here on Millennials, and then Saturday will be on Black Liberation Media. Adeem, good to see you too. I just saw Adeem like an hour ago. So anyway, all right. That's that. Anyways, exciting stuff. Good to be with you all. And tomorrow, Fatih Nimir and Abdul Jawad Omar will be back together, and we'll do another conversation on Palestine too. So, anyways, a lot going on. So before we get into, I have a lot of questions or a few questions that I laid out, but there's so much going on right now, and I just wanted to give you all a sense to kind of ground this discussion with what you're, I don't know, thinking about most, or the kind of, I mean, obviously we just to say, like, we were like, okay, we're going to do a discussion about Lebanon, right? We were like, that's important right now. And then there was an announcement of the ground invasion, right? That like, as we were going to set that up, and so we and then like the next day is the Iran's response to the assassinations. And so, it's like there's such a fast and wild sequence of events that obviously has people, I think, feeling all kinds of different ways, understandably. So we're gonna get into kind of all of that. But yeah, where do you all want to start us out, kind of?
Yeah. We're in different places, so it's going to be like a lot of. Do you want to go first? Do you want to go first? It's going to be a lot of Arabing each other on this, and
partnering one another.
Yes. So where my head is at, I think, it comes as no surprise to you, Jared, and certainly folks who are awesome and always present in these conversations, that I've been thinking a lot about affective, where things are affectively, where things are psychically for people. And I think there's something very specific about this week where I've heard from a lot of people, and certainly have cycled through things myself and in conversation and processing with definitely with Stephen, and then even with friends, even with you, Jared, over, text, of people feeling like they, that there was something really monumental that happened, particularly with the assassination of Nasrallah, and feeling so much words from gutted to devastated to just feeling like running up against a wall. I've been hearing a lot of people talking about feeling demoralized. And there's something in that. There's something so important for us to pay attention to, see what's happening. And certainly, like you said, the sequence of events, then what are the ways in which, again, psychological warfare, you've talked about psyops a lot, counterinsurgency, all these things come to play a very specific role in it's not an issue of like whether we're feeling something or not. There's an actual loss that happened. And by the way, that loss also was accompanied by not only genocidal rhetoric, but actually a gross show of indiscriminate violence done by a genocidal regime close to the 1 year anniversary of a genocide that we've been watching. So like all these things are at play. And so I've been just thinking about the layers that are involved. And one of the things that I've been communicating with people is that I'm feeling the affect, like we've talked a lot about, especially you and me, about like the importance of feeling it and doing justice to all the layers, and feeling recommitted actually more than ever at this point, both as an ethical imperative, but also in terms of like what's demanded of us right now. So that's where my mind is at. I think that's how I'm coming into this today.
Yeah, first I want to thank you, Jared, for always keeping the conversation on the front burner. So thank you, and thanks for everyone who tunes in. And I really do feel, as much as a cliche it is, I do feel like this podcast is one of really of a conversation that I always appreciate. So we're here and we learn from you as much as, anything else. So thanks so much. I also just want to say before I say anything that, with all the stuff that's happening in Lebanon, that we're almost 1 year away, 5 days away from the beginning of a genocide. I want to just, put on our map that, 5 massacres happened over the past 24 hours. An orphanage, an orphanage was bombed. A school was bombed, and something like last time I saw, like 55 people had been killed within 24 hours and in Gaza. So I just want to, not regularize that and just contextualize that. Also, when we think about Lebanon, I just want to also put front and center the places that are getting bombed in Lebanon are, Harat Harek, Shiah, Sur, which is a Tyre in English. Now towns like Shweifet and Hadath, which are mixed towns. Actually, they were previously historically half Christian and Druze, not really Shia or Muslim, but over the past 30 years there had been migration, and they're basically highly dense, densely populated residential areas. These are not, military areas. These are densely populated areas, and just the front and center of the sort of civilian casualties and the civilian targeting, really, of Palestinians and Lebanese. And by the way, Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon were also bombed, right? And if you know the density, of these places, it's there's no way to have a surgical strike. And it's completely gratuitous. And there's the one in Lebanon, actually, I believe, and in places like Kola in Lebanon, in Beirut, both targeting PFLP sites, as I've been told, and of course, what's happening in the West Bank, the targeting assassination of a high-ranking Fatah official, as well as the death of his son in the process. So just this mass murder that Israel does as a programmatic thing, and I want to put that in the front. And I guess to think about what you said, that you kind of like named how quickly things happen, but on the other hand, like as what Lara was saying, like as we're sitting in the moment, it seems so slow, right?
Mm-hmm.
We seem like we're being degraded, and I can't help but think that's a parallel to think about how systems of power individualize us and degrade us and make us feel alone. And here now, we're being atomized into particular historical moments. So I just very briefly ask like where I am and where like to ground ourselves and maybe our discussion is within the context of Lebanon, and that is to say that Lebanon has always been Lebanon's future, past, and present is intertwined within the destiny of the settler colonial state of Israel. Knowing the history of Lebanon is super important. 1948, no one speaks of a number of villages, 7 villages that were depopulated. They were all Shiite villages, and there are no Shiites considered in Palestine. There's a town still that is being occupied called Mazar Shaba Farms. The Zionists have always been cultivating their allies in Lebanon. The United States has always been a part of trying to exert its influence on Lebanon. The French obviously has a colonial history in Lebanon. Lebanon is saturated and structured by these settler colonial and imperialist forces. And somehow when Lebanese nationalists try to then side against Hizbu'llah and say, oh, Hizbu'llah brought this on to us, and no one really cares about Lebanon. Lebanon is not a country where the Lebanese care about its country. There's an innocent, there's a call to innocence about Lebanon and Lebanese identity and Lebanese. There is a Lebanese identity, but no one has loyalty to the Lebanese state. The Lebanese state is a configuration of sectarian elites that allow themselves to be used as international proxies for international machinations to maintain their domination over the Lebanese people and Lebanese economy. And this is the conditions in which resistance to the settler colony of the state now known as Israel, apartheid Israel, it happens. So Lebanon's existence has always been tied with the Palestinian, the struggle for Palestinian liberation, the struggle against colonialism, and the struggle against the settler colony, which does not innocently live there and doesn't really want anything to do, and we just want peace. No, they've been intimately insinuating themselves within Lebanese politics since its inception and before. There are books about how they started very much before, trying to work on the Maronites as kind of like the Maronites are kind of like the Jews of the Arab world, kind of, like small minority, blah, 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 indigenous people, all that sort of stuff. So I just want to kind of ground ourselves in understanding that this antagonism is not new, that Israel has always targeted Lebanon, and the fate of the Lebanese are intertwined within the Palestinians. And finally, the fact that the Israelis have always violated Lebanese sovereignty, and in doing and had always disregard for Lebanese civilians. So in 68, there's the PFLP or someone, they kidnap or bomb some El Al plane. What does Israel do in 1968? It has a commando raid into Beirut airport and blow up 12 civilian carriers, 12 civilian planes for MEA, and two cargo planes. And they do that with the commando. And what happens? Oh, commando, everyone's like clapping how smart the Israeli commandos are after they've violated international law. And then it goes on from there, right? It goes on from there. In 1978, they invade, kill several hundred Lebanese, establish an illegal occupation zone. At that point, the UN makes United Nations Security Council resolutions to withdraw. They don't until they're expelled in 2000 by the Lebanese resistance. They bomb in 1998, they invade and kill, again, thousands. In 1992, they kill 20 to 30,000 Lebanese civilians in 1992, right? And oversee a massacre of 2,000 to 3,000 Palestinian civilians in Sabra Shatila, right? By their proxies. So what we see in Lebanon, we need to decompress ourselves and understand this is a long war. This is a long war, and that no matter where one is on regarding Hizbu'llah has inherited, maybe taken away, maybe stolen, because some people say if you understood the leftists as used to being the head of the resistance, but they have inherited the mantle of resistance, and the resistance is for Lebanon and for the Palestinian people.
Yeah. Lara, do you want to respond to anything that Stephen said there?
Yeah, I mean, there you have it, folks. No, I think it's really important. I mean, laying the groundwork like that for me is super important because it de-exceptionalizes Lebanon. And I think there's many things that end up happening is that there's a way in which, within a couple of days of things happening in Lebanon, you started hearing that the United States is working on a ceasefire and all these sorts of things. And there's a way in which it becomes, as a Lebanese person, you end up, of course, you're sort of tied to people there and you're concerned. And my entire family still lives there. So I'm following it, friends, comrades, intimately involved with the everydayness of that, which is a whole surreal experience, of course, just like our Palestinian siblings have been saying, is that what it means affectively and psychically when you're watching these videos and the places, right? And it's a different experience when you're like, they bombed the Kola as a undergraduate going to the American University of Beirut and traveling up to it's a main place where all the buses come to and are there for the major place of transportation that goes everywhere across the country, right? And so, hearing about these things, you're also sort of locating in time and space. You know what it looks like. These places intimately. So there's a feeling about that. And also at the same time, so of course, a part of us is like, oh, this is, people are working on a ceasefire. But then having to also reckon with the fact that we've been witnessing a genocide for an entire year in Gaza. And in 3 days, you're having a conversation about a ceasefire in Lebanon.
Mhm.
And this does come from an exceptionalization of Lebanon in the sphere, but also a way in which this intimate knowledge and connection that Stephen is saying is always worked on. The sort of disconnecting Lebanon from Palestine and the resistance against a Zionist condition is precisely what's worked on for people, and what fans the flames of these, sectarian divisions, of course, that end up happening that really come to play in Lebanon. But it's also a targeting of those spaces of connection between people, of the places of natural connection where we all know what it means to be under Zionist occupation. We all know what it means to have our daily life kind of hanging in the balance of, like, at any moment you could, decide and get the green light from the United States to strike Lebanon, right? That's precisely also what's in the balance, why it's important, also what Stephen is laying the groundwork for, is that anytime we're considering this, it's for me to go back to the condition, and that condition is Zionism. And the condition of Zionism is one that is structural. It's one that intends to create fissures between people who live under the same condition, right? Like, if there's any people that are going to know and be able to feel fully, and we did see parts of this too, and that's the parts I think that people end up downplaying. So we see the first attack on Dahieh, and the next day, right away, we see a banner that goes up that says, you can bomb us all you want, but we're not going to forget Palestine. Like, those shows of clarity, what I've said before is militant clarity about what the actual intention is. That banner is going up, not just because there's a solidarity to Palestine. Certainly that's part of it, but it's also because there's a recognition that you are bombing us here specifically because you are trying to have us disconnect from Palestinians, because you are trying to displace your machinery, your genocidal machinery, and make us think if it weren't for the Palestinians, this wouldn't be happening. But what Stephen lays out for us is just like, no, this is happening because there's a Zionist state, right? Tough neighborhood that, like, settled a place that is not theirs to settle, right? And so that is the condition we come back to. So people sort of naming this and laying this out, this is why I think going back to the history is really important, especially when it comes to Lebanon, because the targeting is specifically along these lines, right? For us to forget, for us to think it's a different issue, for us to say that Lebanese have other things they need to be worried about. There's all the things that you have to be worried about are true, and also those things are inextricable from the condition of Zionism and the power that they sort of can flex at any moment, of course, with the intimate knowledge and help from the United States, right? So we see these pager attacks or the walkie-talkie attacks. There's absolutely no way that this sort of network of surveillance and an ability to sort of take out, I mean, I know we're going to get into this, but this conversation about how, majestic and how powerful and their prowess and all of that, it's just like, give me a break. This any other country with the same amount of support from a unipolar power and the biggest empire in the world could do the same thing. Like, you're a bunch of clowns that you're taking this as a win, right? They put I could switch out anybody and it would be this. In fact, that's I feel like that's like a testimony to how weak you are without the support of all these other superpowers in the world that are supporting you and providing political cover and giving impunity. And I think that what we're seeing in terms of response in Lebanon, both by regular folks and the resistance, is one that says we're not forgetting actually this condition. And no matter what you do to try to have us deflect and sort of think about things in a different way. People are sort of committed, I think, in their best moments to seeing this as one part of a larger puzzle. And there's many ways in which I'm getting the feeling that it's just like, if this continues to happen all the time, there's like an end game here. Like, what's your end game, right? And there's a commitment to be like, this is a spiral that's happening. And at some point, there's also an implosion, right? They're imploding on themselves. We know that, of course, the more that the Zionist entity feels like it's losing, and it is, as we've been seeing, both in terms of its, ability to claim legitimacy and popular opinion, and actually on the ground losses, right? That there's no pretense left, and the violence will just be completely unbridled and also wreak the most havoc. And I think that, and part of what I always say is, certainly they have bombs and weapons, and that's for us to blame the United States for. But they really are upping the ante in terms of psychological warfare, because they are desperate, right? And that's the thing that I'm most concerned about, is that for us to really be paying attention right now about all the stops they're going to be pulling out along those lines.
Can I just make one point of clarification, actually, and build on what Lara said? I just want, Lara completely agree with me with this. So it's just, when she was talking about Zionism and she talks about the condition, and I want us to understand that when we speak of Zionism, we also speak of imperialism. Zionism cannot exist without imperialism. Right. It couldn't exist without colonial support before 1948. It was the British that allowed the Zionist immigrants to come in and to build a shadow state, to arm themselves, to have a whole infrastructure, to build literally, a turnkey state that they had ready to go, and military, healthcare system, and all these sorts of things that could only be done with the support of the British, right? Concessions to the electrical grid, to build the electrical grid, to build infrastructure. Lara is saying this, I just want to clarify to make sure to understand when we say what this condition is that Zionism, while it's not indistinguishable from, it is intertwined with and cannot be detangled from American imperialism and Western imperialism and colonial legacies. It cannot be. And so when we think about, for example, the colonial borders that are imposed upon Lebanon, those are colonial borders that Israel actually doesn't want. They want more. They're expansionists.
Right.
Let's understand, they are an expansionist and have always been an expansionist, land-grabbing settler colony. And whether those pictures of, the development of the Zionist development of southern Lebanon that came out in 24 hours is psychological warfare, or whether it's a disclosure of their fantasy, it doesn't matter. What it matters is we understand within the Zionist imagination, the borders in which they inherited were not ones that they wanted. It was one that the colonizing powers wanted. And then the colonizing powers codified them effectively by allowing them to take over historic Palestine in certain increments. So I just want us to understand that we don't have the Zionists over here and the imperialists over here. We have this, and they're enmeshed, and they're enmeshed, and they share certain interests and visions of the world that are saturated and constructed by white supremacy, racial capitalism, imperial domination, which allows us then to easily skip to the point of why people deserve to be killed, or why do we call for a ceasefire within 3 days because somehow the Lebanese are a little bit better, right? Because the Lebanese, they're not better only because they're more Western or not more Western. Lebanon is more intertwined within the colonial condition than Palestine. than Gazans, right? There are so many Lebanese who really love the colonial line. They swallow it, hook, line, and sinker, right? That's their cultural cachet, how they're closer to being Western. So there are conditions that is part of the condition. This idea of, so the ceasefire itself, again, it's linked to this sort of imperial saturation of how the whole Middle East has been structured around this imperialist vision, and Zionism is a part of it. So I don't know if that's too abstract, but I just kind of want to drill that down more.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that both of you said that has me thinking about a whole range of different things. I mean, one is, a few people have made this point, and it's bad of me that I can't cite exactly where I got this commentary from, but just to say that it came from somewhere else as I say it. But is that, in the last few years of South African apartheid, basically they attacked everybody around them. Like they would go, and they would attack Zambia, and then they would attack Zimbabwe, and then they would attack, Angola, right, Mozambique, right, and so there was this kind of, as things are falling apart as a settler colony, which in that time it still had settler rule essentially, directly, that you start to lash out at everybody else and think that this is going to be the way that you expand and save yourself and defeat the forces around you, right? But eventually it does lead to your implosion, combined with everything else, right? With all of the internal resistance to apartheid, to the international movements, boycotting and everything else, that all of these things, become a kind of eventually unsustainable condition. And look, I don't believe in inevitability at all. Like, I don't think that has to be the way that this plays out. But I do think that it is important to understand, to think about in that way as sort of searching for a way out of a situation, which is something, I mean, in the many conversations I've had with Abdul Jawad, he's really highlighted that for a very long time, Israel as a the settler colonial entity that it has been since October 7th hasn't really been able to figure out, how are we going to actually resolve this situation, right? How are we going to get out of this? What are we going to do? How are we going to reconstruct an understanding of so-called Israeli security after it has been so shattered? All of these things. And so anyways, I just wanted to say that. And I think one of the things that's interesting, and we could probably pivot to this next kind of question, is the different attacks on Lebanon, right? Starting to think about, first it was increasing the amount of airstrikes, and then it was the pager attacks, which, by the way, I just want to say, like, it is such a terrorist move. Like, it is like textbook terrorism, right? Like there's nothing, I mean, this episode will probably be immediately demonetizing for me saying that word so many times, but it's just like, the only reason that it's perceived any other kind of way is because the West desperately wants it to be perceived some other kind of way. I mean, nobody else in the world is like, oh, that's, so sophisticated, right? The way that the West, wants to talk about it, right? It's bananas. I mean, you're blowing up people's walkie-talkies at funerals, and like, it's blowing up in an ambulance, or whatever. I mean, it's wild stuff. And it's interesting because it's like so part of where I want to go with that, though, is that, like, I think one of the things that we have to be careful of and resist right now is that the West is very clearly the US and the UK in particular, I'm thinking about here mainly because that's the media that I see most. But they're very much trying to kind of manufacture more and more societal consent for actually more regional escalation, right? And I think it's not just escalation for escalation's sake, but it connects into your point around kind of the settler ambitions of Israel. Those may not perfectly align with what the US or the UK want, but there is this moment where you have all of these people talking about reconfiguring the balances of force and power in the Middle East, right? And obviously Iran becomes a central kind of fixation in this equation too. Because of the way that these forces, the axis of resistance, right? The forces that are involved and are challenging Israel in these moments. And so I think that's something that it says something to me about, again, the kind of the media class, I think, always speaks something to the sort of ambitions and the psychology and the desires of the ruling class. And with Gaza, it became difficult for them to even cover it or to really talk about it, because it just was so grotesque, right? It was very difficult to explain constantly, like, oh no, it's okay to bomb these universities and hospitals for XYZ reason, right? The constant need to sort of justify that. A lot of the language had shifted towards, getting aid in and stuff like that within the media, I mean, but then the media shifts dramatically with as the attention shifts towards Lebanon and now towards Iran too. And I think that's it's just a kind of danger and a psychological thing that I kind of want to maybe talk about for a minute. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I think we're seeing, and I think this is part of why folks were feeling so, this is the sense I got, feeling so demoralized because of the sudden shift immediately. Not that it's not like we were relying on mainstream media to narrate this accurately in any way, but the stabilizing force we saw, like stabilizing empire is all I can sort of think about it as and sort of describing as, and all the forces coming together to sort of repeat the script over and over and over again, right? Where all of a sudden, like you're saying, we're seeing these psychic inversions of who's a terrorist and who's not, right? Like somehow a 6-year-old in Lebanon who gets martyred because she happens to be around a pager, somehow we're invited to disidentify from her humanity and actually align her with terrorism, while the people who are indiscriminately blowing up, effectively having, small bombs, EIDs everywhere and blowing them up indiscriminately, that's not an act of terrorism, right? And so I think the force with which we saw, and almost the glee, there's almost a sadistic glee that we were seeing with mainstream media and talking heads, and certainly government officials just have something to finally wrap their hands around again, to be able to refocus this in a way that shored up their imperial aims and shored up why it was so important to, be a lifelong ally of the settler state and, support its right to defend itself, so on and so forth. I think the force with which, and the gusto really is jarring, because we saw it happen for an entire year. We've been watching it happen, and it was the same rhetoric being sort of regulated all over again in a different way, where like folks are immediately like, I see this, I understand what it is. So it's also, part of it is like the force with which it's happening. The other part of it is just like, there's an awakening and a consciousness now about it, that there's before it was like, I'm watching this happen and I'm slowly learning it. Now it's like, oh fuck, I know where this is going, right? So there's also like a bracing of oneself that's happening. There's so much happening affectively because we understand where this is going. And certainly we understand, because we've been seeing this for an entire year happening in Gaza, and like Stephen said, even within the last 24 hours, it's still happening. I think I saw a tweet of yours, Jared, where you're like, they were pissed off that Iran didn't hit any civilians, so they had to go, murder their own civilians, because that's their sense of things, of like, this is how we do this, that we have to destroy and target as many people, and the more kills we have, it's the more might we have, right? But I think part of it also is when you're saying like, there's nothing more like textbook terrorism than this. And I just kind of want to call in that, like, the reason why this force can happen like this and the traction it has, where now you can see almost scripted every single mainstream sort of source repeat the same thing, or people writing things, or I don't know, the Atlantic, the Intercept, all of these things that were being written about, how the settler state honeypotted. It was unhinged how quickly it was happening. It was almost like they had it written before. Like, that's what I mean about the sadistic glee of like being able to cohere this. The only reason why it can have traction like that is precisely because, if we're going back to imperialism, Zionism being together, is the systematic nature in which the figure of the terrorist has been seared into the mind, of course, of people in the United States and certainly globally after the war on terror, right, starts. It's sort of like immediately, you don't have to do much. All you have to do is say Hizbu'llah is targeted, and racism and Islamophobia and dehumanization does the work for them. That's the traction that we get, and that's why the psychic inversion can happen. That's why we can, even as you're seeing acts of terror happen, you can still hear people distort that and have us think that it's the people holding the pagers that are the terrorists, right? And so I was in contact with surgeons at AUB MC, and they were saying that the words that, and I really want to name this because I think this is the impact, and it's not to do the work of like, let me humanize these people. No, the starting point is that these people are human. And I think our arguments where we're like, but they were just civilians. It doesn't matter if they were Hizbu'llah militants. You don't get to fucking do this. You don't get to indiscriminately bomb. You don't get to interfere with supply chain. You don't get to plant for 15 years, have shell companies that end up doing like all these acts. Shows the intention with which this is done. And we don't have to qualify who it is that's holding these pagers. At every level, this is a crime against humanity. And that's the point. So number one, it's like denaturalizing even us having to be like, but it was this person. But to speak a little further about like how this actually materialized, because they're real people, because I want to do justice to what actually happened and what the outcome of this is that we also know that 30 seconds before they detonated, right, the pagers, that there was a message that was sent to ensure that people were holding their pagers, right? And so it's not just a targeting, it's also a targeted maiming, right? And we can go back to just Spears-Poir's work around this about targeted debilitation and maiming. If you're not going to be murdered, we will maim you, right? So people looking at this pager, and the surgeon who sort of communicated with me was like, that means that they are targeting hands, arms, face, right? Eyes. So this level of a deliberate targeting also has a particular aim, right? And that aim is, like you were saying, also going off in, of course, in hospitals. I mean, who carries pagers? I think Qatar Airways actually sent out a thing saying pagers aren't allowed coming from Lebanon. In the UK, I think it's the largest number of doctors who carry. I mean, the levels and layers of this are undeniable. And I think that's the piece of us to continue to come back and sort of rewrite, and when I mean that, like RIGHT, the psychic inversion, and really come back to this idea. I know people over time have said, don't use the word terrorist or terrorism because this has been saturated by, Islamophobia. But I actually think there's something to be said when we're pushing up against a psychic inversion to actually name the act that is happening. And the act that is happening is precisely because of its intention, its deliberation, its frequency, its ability to be done over this number of years, and your ability to sort of reach into people's interior spaces, right? And make them feel terrorized in every space they are. That is terrorism.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to say something quickly, and I know, Stephen, you'll have thoughts on that, but yeah, I mean, indiscriminate attacks. I mean, and attacks that, I mean, because even if you're targeting, and yes, they were targeting militants, they were targeting Hizbu'llah party members, right? But like, people have homes, they have families, they go to the grocery store, right? And so like the idea of just creating explosives that just be anywhere I mean, it's the definition of, I think, I mean, and I totally understand the critique of using even the term terrorism, and I often resist it myself too. Yeah. Because ultimately it's kind of a stand-in for asymmetrical warfare, but it is used to, it's a state language, right? It's a language that the state uses to legitimize non-state actors and their use of violence. But there is this other side of it, this other definition of it, I think, that is important, right? Which is around, attacks that are designed to, create kind of a terror as a psychological thing within whole communities, right? And to make people not, to be able to sort of doubt, like, can I answer my phone? Can I go to the store? Can I do these things, right? The other thing I wanted to say quickly to folks is, like, if you're looking for a good book to read on Hizbu'llah, this is Amal Saad's book. It came out in 2003, so it is like historically dated, as in it doesn't have like the most current stuff, but it is really good on understanding the party and understanding how their politics and also their sort of religious views and how those things relate. And I think it's, anybody that's looking for a book that could give you a better understanding of Hizbullah as a party, its background, its ideology and whatnot, I really do recommend it to folks. But yes, Stephen, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. I mean, Lara laid down a lot of analysis, and myself, I was just trying to go through, and what you said too. So, I just want to kind of, this is not where I want to go, but I just want to just build on one thing Lara, she said about, the glee of all these attacks is one to shore up, and I forgot the word that she was using, but when she was talking, or when you were talking, Habibti, I was just thinking about, it's there to shore up supremacy. Because since October 7th, the settler colony, which is a little stand-in for the Imperial West, that is, why does the United States support Israel so much? Why does Europe? Guilt because the Holocaust and all that sort of stuff? Yes, but no, really, because they see themselves in Israel. Israel, I've said this for 25 years. Israel is a mini-me of the United States. They see themselves in Israel, and they got snuck in October 7th, and they got snuck hard. And whether or not the IOF is responsible for annihilating Israelis and killing those people on the ground, because that level of destruction was clearly done by Israeli firepower, whether or not that's true or not, whether you believe it or not, it doesn't matter. Israel was compromised, and Israel's self-view of supremacy was irrevocably damaged. And this also strikes fear in the heart of the imperialists in the West and white supremacy. And so you're right, that glee, they could blow up anybody anywhere they want in their killing little babies, terrorist babies. That is a shoring up of their supremacy. So I just want to speak to that, right? Because of course, if you replace pagers and walkie-talkies with bus bombings, it becomes terrorism, clear terrorism. Because on buses, the argument is that those are soldiers on those buses inside the apartheid state, and everyone between 18 and 60 are all somehow conscribed within the military. They're all military. They're all fair. If that's the argument, then we have to think about how that argument sort of commutes. But then also to think about so even if we say that's okay, then it's okay to kill their children and their grandparents too. So then you're making an argument that's okay to blow up a bus that has soldiers on it, but also might have their mothers and children on it because they're collateral damage. So there's a lot of stuff, and that's just called, whether we call it terrorism or not, it doesn't really matter. It's called a violation of international, conduct to the conventions to which Israel, who claims to be a legitimate state, is signatory. So that's just straight up. We got to sort of like back our shit up sometimes. Like, I'm not one to argue law always, but we got to back shit up to like its rhetorical structure, right? And it's just like, are you a signature to these? Do you want to be a legitimate state? Okay. If you want to be a legitimate state, then you're a signatory to certain conventions. Are you in violation of those conventions? You are. Guess what? By every modicum of international law, apartheid Israel is a genocidal state right now. Has been by every modicum of just straight down the line legal talk. Every international institution, that the international order, that the UN, everything that we ascribe to as a civilized world, everything that we all sign on to has adjudicated very clearly this is a probable genocide. And we also adjudicate that you're not allowed to blow up a militant child, and you're not allowed to technically you're not allowed to build a militant and blow up a militant when they're home eating with their family. Because if that were the case, we could blow up every single Israeli in their homes between 18 and 60 years old, which the Israelis would actually, this is an Israeli argument inside Israel, which say like, we shouldn't be doing this shit because everyone is. So, I mean, this is an Israeli argument, so like, I think, so there are so many components going on here, but I think I'm always about like, sort of like, how do we ground ourselves? Right. And then get lost in the madness, because there is a madness going on. And that just leads me to the other piece, which is, you're talking, Jared, and I hear a very rationalist analysis. But we have to understand, the lashing out and these sorts of things, and there's an end game that can't be, these resolutions can't happen. But we have to understand one thing about fascists. Oh, where'd he go?
He said the moment. The kiddos. Keep talking. You talk to me.
Are we like?
Hey,
are we still out there?
Yes.
All right.
Cafe.
Hey. So my point is that I thought it was just disorienting.
No.
I'm like in the room with you, and I'm like, hey.
Still live, baby.
Yeah. I haven't seen you, so I'm like, I just love the life. I thought it was a little treat for me.
Cafe.
I was like, time to take off the coffee.
Still on the air.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I'm saying, like, what we're thinking when we think about, like, what does the state of Israel, what is their game plan, right? We think that there's a rational calculus going on, and there's not. One thing we have learned about fascists is fascists have no program. They have a maximalist program and they have a destructive program. And what Israel is doing now is they're maximizing their advantage. No one's going to hate them any more than they're already hated now on an international level. People are coming after them. People are abandoning them. Even their allies in the West are slowly starting to back away, right? They know they have a window, and they also know that they got to go for broke, because if they pull back, consequences are going to happen. And I'm not just talking about, Netanyahu trying to save his government, because if he knows that a war stops, then they're going to remove him and he's going to go to jail, what all the liberal Zionists say, right? No, I'm talking Israel is a pariah state. And if we stop this churning, they know if we stop the tempest and water gets to be calm, everyone's going to be like, yo, it's time. It's time for you to account. The impunity is going to have an endpoint, right? There's going to be an end to their impunity. And so right now, I think we all are thinking rationally, right? But it's not about rational calculations. It's about how can the fascist state maximize their advantage, which is why they fucked themselves right now. Because they were so fucking cocksure that they could have left this whole fucking thing and got away with a massive win. They hit freaking Haniyeh with no freaking consequences. They hit Hassan Nasrallah with no consequences. They've eliminated the top 6 other leaders of that organization with no consequences, right? They blew up 2,000 people. 5,000, as Lara said, now have no eyes with no consequences. They could have walked away being that wet dream of the American media as they're making it out to be. But what did they do? They are so arrogant and they're pushing their advantage. They want to go into Lebanon. And they're getting their asses handed to them. Right? Because the fascist is arrogant. The fascist is arrogant. And the fascist is maximalist. And the fascist is going to maximize their political advantage, just like they try to do, like the Trump administration. It's always push, 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 push. And people are like, hey, you can't do that. There's checks and balances. Lara said this. And it's like, no, guess what? There aren't. There aren't. There's nothing sacred. They go after sacred cows. That's the fascists. Fascists have no program. They have one technique, which is go for every single sacred cow. That's why they
also, they do brinksmanship and they rely on the reason of others to stop.
And you're the state of Israel and have no impunity. And you have absolute impunity. You have no consequences. Mm-hmm. They are pushing. Oh my God, Biden's so upset. Biden is literally castrated. I don't use that term much, but he's completely castrated, they say, right? But it's not that he's castrated. They know that Biden is a Zionist, and they know that the United States, especially during an election year, is not going to freaking pull the plug from the apartheid state. So there's no reason, there's no rationale. The ration is maximalist policies. Try to push their advantage as much as they can while they can. And I think when we understand this, we're all trying to make sense of, well, if they could do this and then, no, things like ceasefire and all that, that's not an issue, man. Ceasefire has always been a valence, has been cover for them. And it's been cover for the United States, which we have learned are absolute blatant liars. They lie. Blinken is a bold-faced liar. He's a bold-faced liar. And whoever is from a spook and listening to this, you hear me. Blinken is a liar. He's a fucking imperialist liar. And every spokesperson is a liar. They say, we don't know where Israel assets are. We can't speak to. Yes, you do, because this is an American war that they're already involved in. And Israel knows that. They're so deep in this war, United States can't pull out. And that's the calculus. That's the calculus, But of course, like capitalism, it has its gravediggers. And its arrogance may be its gravedigger when it's getting its ass handed to them in southern Lebanon. That's my thing.
Yeah. No, I appreciate all of that. I don't know what I said that made you think I was trying to approach it only rationally.
I just think you're a smart guy, and
but no, because I do. I mean, I don't.
It was a
think
platform.
I mean, I don't think it's totally non-rational either, because I think part of it is yes, they see a window of opportunity. They see a blank check. They see good timing, all the things that you just said. But also, I think the part of the challenge is that I think so. Obviously, the U.S. has been supportive always, and will be, right, and that's not changing. But there's one thing for the US to say, okay, we support Israel, we will always arm Israel, we agree with Israel's right to quote unquote defend itself, all that bullshit. But there is another thing for the US to think, okay, actually, maybe our own regional ambitions are actually in alignment at this time with what the Zionists' ambitions are currently. And I don't think that's always the case, right? So one of the things that and I take this, some of my thinking around this comes from another book I have behind me, which is Ireland, Colonialism and the Unfinished Revolution. And one of the things that they talk about in that book is how in settler colonialism that settlers are often more unhinged. They do often have these, they part of their reality, right, is we're on these other people's land and we have to fight them because they won't let us do just what we want.
Those
and we want to
pesky
do
indigenous people that just
no,
won't disappear.
It always takes me back to the Fred Moten quote that settlers always feel like they're defending themselves. It's why they build forts on other people's land. But so there is this understanding of we're out in the wilderness with the savages, quote unquote, and we know what that's really like and you don't. Right? But there can be certain times, I think, where those interests become quite directly aligned, right? Because the US says the people that are a pain, that are a problem for us right now are also a problem for you, and we would rather you deal with them than us, and we will give you the weapons to do that, right? And I think that's one of that was more where I was trying to go, I think, is that I think the part that I see as a particular danger in this moment is the US kind of overplaying its own hand through, which it already has clearly, but through Israel, right? And I I mean, there's no, the United States is irredeemable at this point as well too, right? So it's not like me sitting here like I want to save the United States, but on the flip side of it, like I just think about how awful that is for everyone who then is going to be subjected to that reality, which is what Gaza has experienced. It's what Lebanon is fighting against right now, and so anyways, that was more where my head was at with that. I just want to say,
but I also think it's really important. I agree, Jared, and I think what's really important that's happening is that, like, it's easy for us to get so frustrated and say, how after all this time, these mainstream media is still saying this, or the United States message, or like Kamala's message that she comes out right away, Nasrallah was a terrorist with American blood on his hand. Like the institution of the United States is going to stabilize. The empire's job is to stabilize itself, right? I think what we miss when we focus on just that is that actually Gaza has changed the world. That figure of the terrorist, I think more broadly, is people are suspicious of that. So this alignment, like you're saying, of empire's goals with the settler state in such bold ways we see this happening, for example, with them drawing the parallel of the win they got when they assassinated bin Laden with the win they got when they assassinated Nasrallah. And they're sort of trying to collapse it, which for anybody who knows anything is ahistorical, ridiculous, asinine. I mean, but what are they trying to sort of, the associative process they're trying to drum up for everybody is precisely this, is what is, we're getting a win. It's the win of the Democrats right before, of course, an election. We got this big bad terrorist. He's the big, and this is what's amazing is sort of, I think you and I, Jared, had said this of like, if they're saying, oh, we finally got, in The Guardian, I think it was like, we finally got this, they finally got this person who's been terrorizing so many people his whole life. And you're sort of like, when you take it and you stop for a second, kind of like Stephen's like, go back to basics, is like, who has this person been terrorizing? If you actually think about it, like Nasrallah didn't invade any countries, right? He's not sort of,
he saved your ass from Syria becoming ISIS.
Well, and ISIS, and that's part of it, is that they tried to run this Hamas's ISIS line very early on, and it didn't stick, right? And so now we're seeing it again. Nasrallah was bin Laden, and this is not just a shtick. There's specific ideological aspects of this that are trying to be mobilized at a particular time because it already exists in the fabric of empire, to understand what does that mean. And this goes back to the hyper-militarization and, of course, the lionization of military, because, wow, it was so great. Wasn't it so great when we got bin Laden and like assassinated him from the back, right? It's the same sort of shit with Nasrallah of like, again, wow, look at how mighty we were. We dropped 85 fucking bombs. 85, right? But we got the top terrorist. This was Kamala sort of saying this, right? The top terrorist. And that's, I think, that is where it's terrifying in terms of when they are aligned in that, right? In that sort of line of thinking, because we understand what this means. I think just today I read a sort of a translation from Hebrew source that was like this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to shift them. I wrote that once in a lifetime opportunity to reshape the Middle East.
This is the terminology that's going around. Yeah.
Yes. And that's the honesty. And that is American empire, right? I mean, you've done this over the past 25 years. You've decimated what it looks like. You have had an entire shift. And also, I just want to sort of bring us back that this is what we owe to Gaza. Because I was listening to this clip, this news clip, this Belgian news clip, and it was such a simple thing that he was saying, but it struck me so much, and I just kind of want to speak it here because it's really important for us to remind ourselves as grounding, like we were saying before, but also for our psychic militant clarity. Is that I think they were trying to push up against the guy, and they were like, well, don't you think that Hizbu'llah is a terrorist organization? The guy was like, no. And he's like, but most of the world does. He's like, the United States and the UK are not most of the world. And that's to us to continue come back. And that's the point, is it feels so all encompassing because empire's job, right? I think Stephen's bio is like, I text him, I'm like, what a bio, like the tentacles of imperialism. It's meant to make us feel like it invades every province and every space. But really, just like whiteness likes to impose itself when actually the global majority is not white, we have to remember that most of the world is not the United States and most of the world is not the UK. And actually a global majority understands precisely what is being manufactured. It understands the wages we are asked to make. It understands that we are asked in recognizing who's a terrorist in this sort of making of a terrorist. We are asked to disidentify from people who have been oppressed, subjugated, displaced, dispossessed, in the name of American empire and colonialism. And I really do think that folks are there. So it's a matter of sort of paying attention to the asphyxiatory nature of empire. Has a way of making you feel, reaching into you and making you feel like there's no way to move. And this is what breathing psychic space into our spaces are, like internally and in these sorts of conversations, to be like, no, actually most of the world doesn't believe this, and we see right through it, and that's why they're losing their fucking minds, because most people do see right through it and understand precisely what's happening and know that this is people fighting for liberation.
Yeah, right on. So I want to talk. I actually want to jump to talking. So we're going to talk about space for stuff that feels gutting. But I don't want to. I want to go to that in a little bit. So I do want to talk about yesterday. You know, because I think this is one of those things, and it's like I think about. And actually, I mean, maybe it also, in some ways, connects to Nasrallah too, because I think, you know, when he is assassinated, you see immediately how meaningful this person, this figure is to so many people, right? And part of it is absolutely his role in, you know, similar to how a lot of Gazans and Palestinians feel about Hamas and being able to successfully expel, you know, the settlers from Gaza, you know, in 2006, 2000, but 2003, yeah. Yeah.
Something like that.
Somewhere in the, yeah,
Something
yeah,
like
because 06 is Lebanon, but you know, similarly, right, with Hezbollah and with Nasrallah, and Nasrallah being such an important leading figure, that so many people, whether they were Shia, right, or just people who would tune in to hear him speak, or you know, whatever. I mean, just an incredibly charismatic person who also was very clear in a couple of the things that you both said early on. I think, Stephen, you laid it out too. Very clear on the relationship between U.S. imperialism and Zionist settler colonialism. Very clear on what it means for a regime to collaborate then with the US or collaborate with Israel directly. Um, and very actually, I mean, and this is part where it can get challenging sometimes, is that also, you know, opposes disorder a lot of times, like domestically or within certain Arab or Muslim states, if because of the fact that it is it creates a condition which Israel and the United States are often able to manipulate towards their own ends, right? Because of their power and their own sophistication. I don't want to use that stupid word. I hate that word now. But because of that, you know, their intelligence, whatever. But so there's that. I'll say that, and you can respond to any of that you want. But you know, you just saw how meaningful this person was for millions and millions of people around the world. And then beyond that, you know, yesterday you see these, you know, the strikes, the bombings, you know, attacking airports, right? You know, the targets were military airports and the Mossad headquarters, right? And so many videos that you create incontrovertible proof that targets were hit, right? Sounds like a lot of F-35s were hit at 135 million a pop. And you know, there's just I was thinking about that, about October 1st, also in relation to October 7th, right? Of these moments where there's a measure of justice, of response, and it goes back to the point you were making about impunity, right? For an entity that has acted with so much impunity, right? That, I mean, to see children and young people having something to celebrate in Gaza, you know, a year into just horrendous genocide, it's like, how can that not sort of warm your heart, right, on some level? And I was thinking about Jodi Dean, who had written a piece about October 7th, and I think she described it as exhilarating or something, or something along those lines, and was, she was suspended temporarily, was able to get back, thankfully, a lot of support, which is great. But that notion that, you can't even name that you feel that it gives you some kind of good feeling inside to see this violent, unaccountable, genocidal force, the settler colonial force, to be held to account for. I mean, in the case of the Iran response, right, it was for very specific things. It was like, you assassinated this guy, this guy, this guy, you did this on our territory. Like, it's any other nation state operates in quite similar ways, right? And so, and then the last thing is that I do think it is important also that Iran attacked military targets at that point, and very clear ones that were complicit in all kinds of crimes themselves. And that the response of so many Israelis and so many Zionists was, well, they didn't kill any civilians, so it was a failure, right? Which, and then they go out and they, like, as I said, the tweet that you mentioned, Lara, I mean, then they go out and they immediately bomb an orphanage in Gaza, right? Because it's like,
Right.
this is how, I mean, I don't want to psychoanalyze why they did it, but nonetheless, like, this is the response of what you do in that day. You don't go and
It's
think about
collective
military.
punishment.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. Collective punishment, right?
Mhm.
So anyways, obviously that last part, which we can get into in terms of when we get to some of the things that are gutting, because that part is gutting. But I do want to sort of say something, yeah, just sort of give moment to talk about, and today, with, as you said earlier, Stephen, them getting just rocked in southern Lebanon, as they're trying to invade, that there is something that I just want to name, that we feel, or I don't want to speak for everybody else, but I certainly feel when I see this force, meeting the limits of its, aggression and its ability to act with impunity and unchecked, sort of violence against, genocidal violence, I'll just say. Yeah. So either one of you can take that up.
Dave, do you want to?
I'll go first this time. I think it's funny because number one, Lara will say talk about affect, so I'm not going to say that. I think, but I think I will talk about identification.
How did you know?
Oh, I know your soul, honey. People are gonna hate us so much, or me, and they're right, and they're right too, but probably for the wrong reasons. So, I want to talk about identification, because what you're saying is basically that we're not allowed to identify with the oppressed. And, we can think about a figure like Nasrallah. And to some degree, the figure like Nasrallah is like, a lot of figures who might be seen as anti-imperialist, but also might not be the best. They might be problematic, right? So I'm not gonna, Maduro or whomever else, these, and I just, for the record, Putin, fuck him. China, fuck them. For everybody who wants to go cape for them, they still have relations with diplomatic and economic relations with the apartheid state. We all talk about the imperialist center here and being able to cut off all they can do, or they can immediately just cut off the faucet for the apartheid state. China, Russia, nothing. Syria got bombed yesterday, where a couple people died in Syria, the capital. Guess what? there are Russian troops and there are Russian assets in Syria. There's an agreement between the Russians and the Israelis that as long as you don't, and mess with everybody, everything's going to stay cool between them. So for everybody who loves the Russians and say, go talk about Putin, Putin does shit for the Palestinian people and does shit for the Arab people. Okay. And same with China. No one is stepping up. And Turkey. So fuck them all. Okay. And let me just lay that shit down. I just had to lay that out because that shit has to be said. No one's saying this shit. It's got to be said. It's got to be said. When we talk about like shit on the ground, that has to be said. But the point is about identification, which is like we have someone like Nasrallah, and I'm not one to build up anybody in particular. Nasrallah is a sectarian leader. It's all about context, right? Like Nasrallah is a sectarian leader. For a Marxist Lebanese, sectarian leaders are not good. Sectarian in Lebanon, to some degree, Hizbu'llah and Nasrallah are part of the problem. They're part of the problem not because they're any worse than anybody else, but because the country is led by sectarian cronies. An economic elite that are sectarian, that have a sectarian contract between them in how they maintain hegemony over the state. It's state capture. There is no Lebanese state. It's a necropolitical gang of sectarian leaders, and that's why they all bind together. These people who are in a death spiral, but they all get together when there's an election and there are independent movements to try to dislodge them in these non-sectarian, usually liberal, but still non-sectarian movements. So we want to be honest about Hizbu'llah and Nasrallah in certain contexts. And that's the tough part. But on the other hand, he was incredibly smart. He was rational. Dare I say that word now. He was calculating. He was, I hate to say this word, but it has currency in the conversation maybe, which is like moderate, thoughtful. He wasn't an extremist. He did care about Lebanon and not jeopardizing his party's constituency in Lebanon, which is why they didn't go out to war, which is why Israel could checkmate them to some degree by pushing, because the Lebanese don't want to go to war. Right? Because they know what's going to happen to them. So, and this is the problem, someone as filthy as Bashar al-Assad and as oppressive as the Iranian regime do one thing that no one else does, which is stand up to imperialist powers. So we're in a difficult position. We can recognize, let's call it the heroic qualities of Hassan Nasrallah. We can recognize the tragedy in how he was killed and why he was killed and the loss. But we also want to be very careful about
lionize,
idolize, canonizing certain figures too. Because he did take over. He was the head of the resistance. And without him, Lebanon would have been smashed a long time ago. But it's also important to understand how Hizbu'llah became ahead of that. They assassinated every communist militant in the 1980s. And they wiped out the Communist Party, who used to be the head, who used to lead the resistance. So I know I'm pissing people off right now, but like, let's break shit down and be real. This is a war. Let's break shit down. We understand who our allies are and why they are our political allies. And we also understand, though, that when we can sort of get at that sort of objective reality, we can also say, I understand why I'm thrilled when those people, those allies come in and strike those oppressors, those criminal, that state criminal that gets away with everything and then has some comeuppance. Right? I don't like to see people dead. I don't want to see. I'm a parent. I don't want to see anyone killed. You know, it's fucking tragic. It's fucking tragic. But like, you're sending people to their death in Lebanon, man, and they're going to get their ass whooped. And when you see those things in Gaza, they get sniped and they get bombed. It's like, you shouldn't be there. And when we see that, and you might get a little, oh, haha, you know, in your soul, it's because you're not happy that person dies. You're happy that there's some accountability. And you're not happy because Hassan Nasrallah is going to liberate us from everything, and he's the world leader, and Iran and the Axis and Putin. No, what you're feeling, what you're identifying with, is the fact that some accountability is being laid down. You know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, this goes to the issue of impunity. And you were saying, did you want to say something, Jared?
No, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead, because I think you're going to, I've already forgotten what I was going to say anyway. So
okay. Well, I was just going to say, this goes to your point of impunity, that like, to what Stephen was saying about identifying like that there's some accountability. It's not, I think also, it's not just because the settler state, of course, has never had impunity, because that's how it was able to come into being as a settler state and dispossess, you know, upwards of 750,000 people and murder and genocide as the creation of the state. That's the point of not having impunity from its inception.
They have impunity. They don't.
Yes, they have. Sorry, they have impunity, and that from its inception. But also because I think there's a way in which people are also feeling like all the other states that are supporting the settler state also act with impunity, because they do not follow through on their responsibilities in terms of, we're talking about signatories of the Geneva Convention, right? All the things that people had some investment in identification with these laws. It's also to say somebody stepped up and actually did what is our responsibility, all of us, right? And I think Sami Hidimiz at some point had said this on a show where he was saying Hizbu'llah is actually doing what should compel all of us when we see a war crime or a crime against humanity happening, that is actually our responsibility. And so there's also that. It's also saying all of these other countries should be doing this. You should be acting like the Houthis. You should be stopping up, weapons from getting to the settler state. You should be doing everything in your power, because that's actually your responsibility to do that. So when a state steps up and does that after this many years, you might have all the problems in the world with that, but in that act, they are doing precisely what they should be doing. And they are doing that on behalf of all of us that have been might have wanted to intervene, but of course can't intervene at that level to see that. So that's number one about the issue of impunity. There's also a way in which I just kind of want to name, like you're saying, part of what you're saying, Jared, is like there's a way in which we police ourselves, right? We catch it, like we feel this, and then there's all this way and it rushes in about what we can say, what we can't, what am I going to post, and I want to say that that's an implant in us, not only because there's a material reality of what's happening, where we saw, for example, the first tenured professor fired because they liked something, right? They liked Remy Kanazi's point, Instagram post where he was like, you should shame Zionists in your ranks, right? And make them feel unwelcome in these spaces, because it should be shameful. It should be shameful to be a Zionist and a racist, right? In this way, and a genocide supporter. You should be ashamed. You should be made to feel shame around these things. So that self-policing comes from a real place. I just want to say that. But it's really interesting for us to think again around the sort of regularization of a particular social order about what are the things that we police and what we don't. So I thought about the most like random, I don't know, movie, like Independence Day. And here we are like cheering when the freaking like hypothetical creature the aliens get beat. And these are like hypothetical beings that don't even exist right now to us. And there's so much joy, and like everybody's like, fuck yeah. That is, you are socialized in a particular social order that is okay, because of course that movie also shores up American empire and supremacy and all these sorts of things. That is fine, right? So that policing is also not innocent. It's not neutral about what it is that you're policing, because precisely what we were talking about before, the making of a terrorist. So what am I endorsing when I'm, right? Because immediately you're going to sort of be called, oh, what do you support, terrorists and all the rest. We know the story. But the bottom line in that is, and this is the affect piece, is that there's a curation of affect happening about what is okay to feel and what is not okay to feel, right? And it's a lie. Even the curation is a lie, because people will come and say, you are not allowed to be happy about this because everything that we've heard, right? Or Zionists being like, but now they're attacking. Like now it's a problem that we're attacking, even when we don't hit civilians. Now it's a real problem, right? And people will tell you that it's that emotion that you are not allowed to feel, because this is a morally reprehensible emotion to feel. You shouldn't be doing this. But I want us to, this is where it's the lie. The curation is even a lie. Because even when we were showing our sadness around genocide, people would butt Hamas us. We weren't even allowed to feel the depths of our sorrow without somebody stepping in and saying, that's also not okay. So I just kind of want to blow out of the water this idea of the curation of affect is also part of it. And so, of course, we would feel, taken by the sort of gripped by what's happening, because precisely we have been made to feel entirely helpless to do anything. So wouldn't the logical idea be, when an actual state actor, let's use sort of like lingo that's it, is that when an adult comes into the room and actually does what it's supposed to do, that we would be like, oh, great, finally, after this entire year of feeling like we are trying to do everything in our power, everything in our capacity on this level, but we are not state actors. So when a state comes in and does that, of course we're going to feel that, right? Of course we're going to feel this, and we should feel this. We should feel this because that's an implication of our humanity. That's us seeing there is something. We're talking about checks and balances before. Is there any counterforce to this death spiral, this death machine? Is there any counterforce that's going to happen? We should identify that, and that is what we lean into. Yes, there should be a counterforce, and in fact, why hasn't it been done before? That's what we should be feeling too, being like, why did it take this long for there to be a counterforce that, by the way, was also, yes, it was important, but it was targeting specifically, like you were saying, bomber planes. That was the target. The target was the specific thing that is directly responsible for the murder of over 350,000 Palestinians in Gaza. That is what was targeted. And so it's also being clear about that. Exhilaration comes because you just disabled a killing machine, right? Not a person, it's a killing machine. And there's a direct link to this. Right? And if we disabled all of that, no more people would be murdered in Gaza. And that's just the reality of it, right? And that's, I think, so when we start to police ourselves, is to also reckon with the rest of this and be clear on what is it that we are actually feeling and towards what and why it's righteous to be feeling like this. I'm worried if we don't feel like this, especially after a year when everybody's sort of worn down and feels exhausted and feels like they're dissociated or feels like they can't feel anymore, right? That show of joy or exhilaration or any one of these things is our pulse. It's our pulse that we still see, and precisely what people in Lebanon are saying or elsewhere, we're not going to abandon Palestine. That's what it comes down to. And that's what people want to kill on us.
Yeah. And I mean, to go back to Nasrallah for a second, this was something, whatever else, And I hear your
Yes.
critiques, Stephen, and I mean, there's some interesting things with it, and we don't have time to go into all of Hezbollah's history and all of that. But I think that point of, his that Hezbollah was not willing to separate the negotiation of a ceasefire on the northern front
Mhm.
without the resolution of what was happening in Gaza, right?
Mhm.
Without
Mhm.
first a ceasefire that Hamas was willing to agree to, and I think that always that commitment is very clear within him,
Yeah.
of a commitment to Palestine, and understanding that. And I think that, yeah, I mean, that's just something too that I think that, again, like as you said, I mean, the clarity point on some of those things, I think,
Yes.
is what's missing.
Yes.
And like you said, to the point about actually taking up the responsibility, right? Which, again, Hezbollah is not a state, right? Ansar Allah is basically a state, but is not given state recognition at this point. Um, but the, and then, yeah, I mean, Iran, but like that someone, like you said, that who, I mean, this is the thing, is like, I think a lot of times people get in the space of like, who is going to
Right.
hold these people to account, right? And then
Right.
it can be a very desperate, I think it can be
Right.
a place where despair creeps in when you think, oh my God, maybe nobody will,
Mhm.
you know
Mhm. Mhm.
and then even in a situation where none of these forces, I mean, due to the sanctions on Iran also and everything else, like none of these forces are equipped with the level of, the capacity, the raw capacity to inflict violence that Israel is, and that it does with, you know, I don't want to say with, no, because I think they are intentional in how they use that violence.
Mhm.
I don't want to
Mhm.
fall into
It's
any sort of,
pointed. Yeah.
it's pointed, but it's like, how do you say indiscriminate, but also but also targeted
Mhm.
indiscriminacy or something like that, right? Um but so yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing for me in a lot of it is, again, I mean, and it comes down ultimately to a kind of also, I don't know if realpolitik is the right term, but like, who are the actual forces? Like, I think you said this too, Lara. Like, who are the actual forces that are going to do something,
Right.
right? And to the point you're making, Stephen, too, about Russia and China in this moment also. I mean, there are these other forces that a lot of folks have thought, oh, we're entering a multipolar world, etc. And I know China takes a different kind of tact, like they did have the Palestinian factions come together for their conference and that kind of stuff. But what materially has come out
Right.
of this,
Right.
right? Like, I'm making your point. I'm just making it differently. But what materially has come out of this, right? In terms of actually stepping into
Right.
this, in some sort of way of holding someone to account, right? And I think
Yeah.
yes, that is the term. Wanton violence. Yeah, that's a good one.
I
I
want to
want
say,
Go
Jared,
ahead.
to your
my SAT team.
yeah. I just want to say something, Jared, to what you were saying is that, and we see an admission actually from like the Americans and from the, settler state about that's the reason why Nasrallah was assassinated, because he was refusing to compromise, which is a good lesson for us. I mean, if brinksmanship is the issue, right? That is why we need to be uncompromising in our position. That's precisely it.
Right.
And yes, the levels of what might happen to each of us, hopefully we are not going to be assassinated like Nasrallah will.
Well,
But there are, what's that?
Not physically.
Right. Well, that's the thing is like, there are risks that are taken here. And I don't want to sort of, that is the point, is that when you commit yourself, like you're saying, and you commit yourself to a liberatory project, there most of this is like you cannot compromise. There is no compromise about that. And that uncompromising position is both life affirming and soul saving, and also does have a consequence. We've been seeing this, of course, over the course, whether it's the students with the encampments and all that's happening, and people being brought up on charges and people being fired, and like, but I would rather be uncompromising and have consequences, and I have, than feel like I'm not doing my responsibility to the world, to, like what Stephen was saying, to being identified with oppressed folks, and to a just cause.
Yeah, absolutely. There was this thing that happened yesterday that I just appreciated on a small level. So I don't know if you two know who Alice Wong is, but she's the author of Disability Intimacy. So she got the MacArthur Fellowship yesterday, which is a very big deal for people who get it. They will never give it to me. And
any of us.
What is no? Well, yes, probably not. But so she wrote this thing about, like, hard to believe. You know, I am a 2024 MacArthur Fellow. I'm accepting the MacArthur Fellowship amidst the genocide happening in Gaza and indiscriminate terrorist attacks in Lebanon by the state of Israel, and on the 76th year of their occupation in Palestine. So she writes. This is how she writes her acceptance on Twitter, and then all these Zionists came after her. And so this woman wrote, yeah, just after 2 Palestinian terrorists murdered 6 people in Tel Aviv. This was for folks who don't know, there were a couple of, what do you call, sort of lone wolf. What's that?
They were 20. Didn't they kill 20?
They might have injured. I don't know the full number, but yeah. I mean, this was right before. But yeah. And then she, drops in, Iran dropping the missiles, right? And so one thing that I really appreciated was how Alice responded to this. And she said yes.
I mean, Alice has been uncompromising from day one.
So anyways, it's just a great, here you are, you're in this place, you're accepting this very prestigious award, right? And like people came after her, and just to like not back down an inch, and be like, yeah, you could say whatever you want right now. Yes, on that day, I'm gonna say this. So yeah, and I should say, we were talking a lot, like, I mean, people who follow me on Twitter, like, I don't ever feel really uncomfortable with what I'm sharing, but it is also because I don't have, whatever consequences I have for the things that I say, there could always be more, for sure. But I think, because I don't have a job, that's one of the things that, has mostly allowed me not to have to worry about that too much, or has been my excuse for not worrying about it, maybe.
I feel like you would still say all the things you did, even if you were working within a place that threatened you, Jared.
I did, but at a certain point, it does become, as you, I'm sure, know much better than me, both of you, like, it's very challenging. And I was talking to somebody earlier today, it's like so challenging to navigate being in a space where, like, you feel that way in a very committed fashion, and you're surrounded by people who think you're a freak usually, but they also think like completely different forms of you. So I know that's a lot of our audience, like, and I also just want to say, like, I know that is difficult. That's part of why I sometimes want to talk about these media narratives and stuff like that too, is because it's not that I am at all impacted by like what CBS this morning, right. Tony DeCopel's like, stupid rant at Ta-Nehisi Coates the other day or whatever, like, but but I know that like a lot of the people that were in these places with, like, that's what they're watching for the news, and they don't I don't want to say they're completely uncritical, but they generally believe that these people are just telling them the news, you know, like you know, like that there's so many people in the world that when they consume news from the Western media, they do not have any sort of critical analysis upon what they're reading. Especially again, and this is where you're talking about earlier, which I think is always important. I think of Stephen Salida talking about, you know, don't America doesn't have to be your moral center, right? And that I think is really important, of understanding that, like, yeah, but a whole bunch of the world does know that it's total BS, you know? So I guess US liberals is particularly the people that I find to have like the lowest level of media literacy of any people on the planet. You know, because it's like, oh, CBS or CNN told me this, you know.
But that's also but that's also identification, like Stephen was saying, is because they see themselves in that.
Yeah.
Right.
Those are their people. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the space for what feels gutting. So
Would end on that point.
I think go ahead.
Yeah, we can. Yeah.
No.
Oh, what's that?
Stephen was like, are we going to end on that? No, he was like, he doesn't want to end on a downer.
I don't want to end on being gutted.
Oh, okay. Well, we don't have to.
What you got? What you got? What you got?
We don't have to end there. We can go to another thing after that. Yeah. Like, if I just was like, if you need to wrap it up soon, then okay, cool. So yeah, space for what feels gutting. I mean, we've talked about Nasrallah, so I don't think we need to continue to. I mean, I am thinking a lot. I could.
By the way, Allah yarhamu. Just for the record, you know. Allah
What's that?
I said Allah yarhamu for the record.
Yeah. So I do want to say, and I've been saying this for a little while now, but I do think it's important for people to continue to, you know, think about and to support existing mutual aid efforts. The Samir project is one that we had on recently that's really good, that I encourage people to support. I'll pull up some links here in a second. But also, I know like a lot of people are doing work around eSIMs, just different ways that you can support people in Gaza. A lot of the Palestinian organized stuff is better than supporting a lot of the NGOs at this point, especially because there's a lot of moves to try to force people out of the north and things like that still. And so I just want to encourage people also, again, that like doing that, as Hala, who was the person I spoke with from Samir Project, said, you know, it's not charity work, right? Like, you know, one way that you could think about it is reparations, of trying to do something when your tax dollars are literally going to fund this genocide. Another way to think about it is, and we talked about this before, the way that Palestinian youth movement is starting to talk about it, right? Of basically supporting the samud of Palestinian people, supporting the ability for them to persevere and to continue to, I mean, in this moment, there's that adage of how existence is resistance. And sometimes I think that kind of language gets taken up in very, in ways that suggest that people don't need to do anything to resist other than to just, you know, take a nap or whatever. But I do think in this particular moment, it is actually literally true.
Right.
You know, and so I think whatever we can do to support people. So I'll pull in a link to that. But yeah, I mean, also just the fact that that Israel continues to just conduct this war as a war of massacres on, you know, wanton massacres, let's put it that way, in Gaza, and increasingly in Lebanon too. You know, I mean, I know that that's, you know, I appreciated what you shared earlier, Lara, about people that you're in conversation with and family and friends. And it's just, same thing with other folks I know who have family there and friends there. I mean, it's extremely terrorizing, experience. And yeah, I mean, that is on one level, this is a fundamental part of how the Zionist regime conducts its wars. And it is also very much a psychological, thing. It is
Mhm.
driven to demoralize and to,
Mhm.
you know, cause people to just
Demobilize.
live in fear and yeah. So,
Yeah.
anyways, that's me. But you all can share what you want to say in reflection of that.
Yeah. I mean, no, this is the thing. It's meant to demobilize. It's meant to take people offline. It's meant to depoliticize. It's meant to scare people. It's meant to stop people in their tracks. We've talked about before about the commodification of despair. It's meant to act in particular ways where, again, like I was talking about earlier, about feeling asphyxiated, like there's nowhere to move. All of this is intended. There's an intention to this, which is actually also what we saw when Stephen was like, the empire lies and all its stooges lies. Like the Zionist entity lies, right? Even with this idea about a ground invasion and the way in which it was repeated and the state line was repeated. And Stephen and I were talking, I'm like, I'm only hearing this from sources that are like the settler state and the United States, right? And this is not to shame any of us. All of us were, I mean, my comrades and friends from all over the world, we were sort of back and forth, like it's going to start, it's going to start, it's going to start. And this is precisely the place of like to have space when you were saying to be gutted, but it's also to have space for like this shit is meant to work on us in particular ways and is meant to live inside of us and get stuck inside of us. And it's not to feel shame in the moments in which you might succumb to that or feel that. It's to, when we do that, is to also come through the other side, be able to name that's precisely what was happening and disrupt it, right? Rather than having it lodged inside of us and then it just persists. And then it does exactly what it's meant to do, is for us to start doubting the resistance, to start worrying about the fact that there is no end point, or to have a nihilistic perspective, or to say that it's a done deal, when actually precisely what we were saying before, Jared, is like shit moves fast. There's nothing that's done here. And we can't foreclose the end point, especially in favor of the settler state, before anything has happened. That's precisely that's what demobilizing us means, that we sort of lay down, metaphorically and literally lay down arms before anything has happened, right? And I think that's for us, it's again, to give ourselves the capaciousness and the grace to feel this affect, but to recognize that it's an implant within us. And that's the moving through, right? So that we can be like, okay, I recognize what was being done to me. And for what end? Again, it's not innocent and it's not neutral and it's not arbitrary. Yes, it is abuse. Exactly. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah.
I just also want to kind of just add like 2 points, right? And I'll try to be brief. It's just one is the thing, because you start out with the mutual aid issue. And I just remember, we just want to remember, like, mutual aid is an alternative to the social relations in which we are under, right? So we're like asked to give like big NGOs or governmental institutions, or so it just seems to be sort of a parallel conversation about how we are supposed to hope one state comes and helps us. So when, China is going to come in there, I'm sorry, I'm not taking the slap at you, but, like China's going to try to come in there and save the PA. And, but what Hizbu'llah is, and this is where I think we have to be, let's say, more generous to it than someone like Bashar al-Assad, who's doing nothing for, of course, nothing for Palestine, by the way. Also, not talk about never shooting a weapon, never shooting a missile, never shooting a tank, or what some state actor is. That, you know, Hassan Nasrallah is a non-state actor. Hizbu'llah, for all of its effectiveness, is a state actor. So there's something also to us that are kind of pulled away from the frame that we're acculturated into, which is like official networks, right? So mutual aid actually is grounding in a new form of social relations. So I'm like, you know, go for it. And I think if you have those ones that you support, and I thank you for putting on blast, Jared, Samir project and all these, which is really, really important. But I think it's also a way then to think about what Lara was saying, is how do you stay centered? And it's a way of grounding, right? It is a grounding. It's a grounding of something that we know, right? It's something, and that's what's important. That's kind of how we started off too, what I was saying with like history, like thinking about how do we like stay firm. It's hard, like you said, how quickly everything was going. But on the other hand, like for us, it was like every 24 hours felt like a lifetime. We were kind of just held, right? And trying to find the bubbles, what way are the bubbles going up, right? To just get to find out where our equilibrium was. But on the other hand, just thinking about like, what is it that we know? What do we know to be true, right? What are the facts that we know? And not let ourselves get carried away by the propaganda, by the torrent of information that we get from so many different angles, that seem to confirm that, we're all on the back foot, when actually that might not be the case, right? So I think, if that helped, I mean, just to sort of tie that, like mutual aid is kind of to think about the way in which we are in relations with the people in Gaza to keep them secure. Is also the way to think about when we think things are so dire, is to also understand like maybe Hizbu'llah are weakened and yada yada yada, but like also like they got skills and they got plans and then they got experience, and so maybe like Lebanon has to sometimes also kind of like ground themselves in the things that they know, which this is to speak to Lara, which kind of like keeps us secure and keeps that, I think what's the word used, kind of like dissociation or sort of, disequilibrium at bay a little bit. It keeps us a little more grounded. That kind of makes sense.
It does, and it looks like, as we're talking, there's more IOF soldiers getting ambushed in southern Lebanon. So, but yeah, I mean, yeah, and I mean, I think I don't know. I mean, mutual. I do struggle in some ways with how mutual aid has been depoliticized in certain ways sometimes, and also like a lot of times it's not mutual actually in a certain way. But I actually do think in this instance, it may not be mutual in the same way that, if you had a neighborhood group and you're able to connect with people and engage with them politically and, really participate in some form of exchange. It is still deeply, I think, meaningful and necessary. And I agree with you in terms of like one, like, so the Samira project in particular, I'll just speak to them because I had a conversation with them and I have some good understanding of how they operate, right? And it's like there's Palestinians in the diaspora, right? And they're getting money to Palestinians in Gaza, and they're getting the resources that they need to set up tents for people, to set up food kitchen, to to do these things on the ground. And they're doing it in areas where NGOs won't go or they won't operate. And one of the reasons they won't operate is because they'll say like, either they don't have permission to, right, or there's quote unquote war profiteering going on, right, which means people are having to buy the food from people who have taken it, hoarded it, sold it for higher prices or whatever. But that doesn't help people. If an NGO is going to say, hey, I'm not going to go and operate in the north because there's too much war, we can't bring our own food in there, and so we have to buy it there, and that's war profiteering. Like, that actually doesn't allow Palestinians to continue to sustain themselves in the north. You're asking people to either starve or leave or freeze to death or whatever, right? And so in that instance, whether mutual aid is the right term or not, like it's absolutely essential work, I think, that they're doing, right? Because they're also stopping the literal ethnic cleansing of certain regions within Gaza that they know that they will not be able to get back to if they completely have to be abandoned, right? So anyways, yes, all of that. We could close with a little bit. We could revisit some of Basil Arar's 8 rules, which I know both of you have done work.
That's what
on.
it's past midnight here, and Basil al-Araj will sustain me past midnight.
Oh wow. Okay. All right. How do I make this look different though? I might have to hang on. All right. Well, we're doing that. I will take screenshots of a few and pull them up. But do either of you want to say for you either any of his rules or just any of his thought more broadly that has been helpful for you in this time? I mean, a lot of people have kind of revisiting this with the invasion of Lebanon. So yeah. Oof. And I can pull up a couple in a second. One for me is just the propaganda discussion. Do not trust the enemy's propaganda. And I think that was people were pointing that out on the first day of there's a ground invasion of Lebanon going on, and then people in Lebanon are like, no, there isn't.
Yes.
And so on one level, I think that just this notion of not just spreading what Israel is saying about itself. And I think we also need to think about this in terms of US media. If we're going to talk about it, which we do, we have to be really critical and really questioning the narratives and the stories and the things that, because I think that there's sort of this one possibility that there's this desire for this larger regional escalation, and that this could spiral in all kinds of ways and be really terrifying in a lot of ways. And there's also a very real possibility that they're kind of realizing that there's not much more that they're going to be able to accomplish, and that they could decide that they're going to need to stop soon, right? And we don't know. There's nothing prescribed about what will happen. But I think that that's an important thing to remember, is not to trust just the things that we're being fed about what is going to happen or how things are going to proceed. Because even if people want them to proceed in a certain way, does not mean that that's going to work. As with the invasion of southern Lebanon is not going to work, I don't think, the way that so yeah.
For me, the thing that keeps going, one is that, where he ends, we're all Palestinian, and as much as we're all sort of dedicated to the liberation of Palestine, and you don't have to be, you commit yourself to that. That's a commitment. That's a political commitment. But also what keeps reverberating in my mind is that this is not conventional warfare, and that our numbers are going to be higher, right? And I think that doesn't mean that we don't feel the tragedy of every soul that's lost, and recognize that there's a constitutively unjust condition that creates the possibility for our numbers to be higher, right? We know exactly what that is. We know that our numbers are higher because the settler state has the backing of empire, where, you know, just a couple of days ago, $8.7 billion again, right? And it's, our numbers are going to be higher. And I just keep sort of repeating that because it's, you know, one of the things why he says that is just like, this is not conventional warfare, and we can't sort of focus on one win or one victory or all of this, because that is precisely what will continuously be put in our face, right? And we're looking for, we're playing, it's almost like we're playing the long game here, and that's never going to look the same, precisely because it's asymmetrical. And I just keep repeating that over and over and over again. Talk about grounding, right? But also alignment. It's alignment about being militant, yes, in terms of our commitments, but also psychically, just like psychically inoculate ourselves against the ways in which despair can set in. Because if we start to sort of accumulate all the losses, it can look like we're losing just based on that. But it's set up to be like that.
I like that. I like that. Yeah. Inoculate yourself against despair. Wow, that's great. And I just want to just riff on this. You know, you asked us about Bassin's, you know, rules of war or whatever. But I think, you know, what he understood is that, and again, this is kind of, you know, I guess maybe this is the theme of the day, or when I'm harping on, or kind of like how is it to be a revolution when you have no states going to be supporting you? What we learn now is that there are something we know. There are people in this world without any protection of humanity. And it's in that zone that we build a guerrilla movement, right? What happens when you build a guerrilla, because that's what he talks about, right? That our struggle is a guerrilla struggle. And what happens when you have a guerrilla struggle that is not one of the Cold War, where when the Soviet Union and China, for all their faults, did at least provide political cover and some guns. We don't have that now. So I think this conversation that we actually had in general is one we can think through his prism of what it looks like. What does it look like to carry on the protracted war, right? To carry on, but a new sort of protracted war, right? Where, like Lara said, we have to inoculate ourselves against despair, because guess what? There's no state actor that's going to really watch out for us. And let's face it, like Iran allowed Lebanon to get checkmated, and its ally to get checkmated, because they were acting responsibly, by the way. This is not a critique, which is like they didn't want to get nuked, and they knew had they been drawn into the trap that Israel wanted it to be, it would have been a regional war. You know, United States would have had to back it, with it wanting or not. NATO would have had to back it. Israel has been searching for excuses to nuke Iran, and straight up nuke Iran. This is not hyperbole. They want to nuke Iran. They want Iran, and which would lead to a lot of things like regime change, and they could do it with impunity. But so they didn't. They held back. And they held Hizbu'llah back. And Hizbu'llah, they thought, okay, let's try to hold back. Let's try to, you know, absorb these hits, and we're going to have this low grade exchanges, and we're going to resist. We're going to try to do rope-a-dope. But rope-a-dope, I was saying this to Lara the other day. Rope-a-dope, the ring doesn't change in rope-a-dope. The whole point about the rope-a-dope is you have something behind you that give you some sort of boundary, but there's no boundary. So they got rope-a-dope, but within an expanding ring. So they kind of got checkmated, because Iran was kind of holding them back too, and being like, and not supporting too. So like, so again, that's a realpolitik critique, not a like I hate Iran or I hate what happened. It was just a realpolitik, you know, critique. And so the question is also then, how is it that we construct a resistance movement, a guerrilla movement, when we understand that we're alone. But that we're alone means that we have to build our movement from the ground up. And that's what Lara Sheehi always said too, right? It is one that is grassroots, right? And it has to be built up from that. And we also, and again, also does is take an accounting of our assets and our liabilities, take an account of who are our allies and what are their limitations,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and who are our enemies and what are their limitations. So I don't, this is kind of, I think, where I would end up with for him, at least for him.
Yeah, and I think that's important. I mean, the point you're making about Iran is an important one, and I think, you know, all the Axis actors, to be honest, is like I mean, I think the point about the measured, the ladder of escalation, the measured approach, the actual non-crossing of red lines, right? Not, I mean, still amid all of that, I think all credit is due from my perspective to them for staying engaged and continuing to do those things, right? To make it, but your point is, I appreciate the rope-a-dope analogy, because I think the challenge, and it's not that they don't know this, the challenge of dealing with Israel, with the United States as its backdrop, as its backstop, is that there are no limits to what they are willing to do, right? And yeah, I mean, it's just it's kind of in a, you know, I mean, I don't want to give, I don't think it's totally a situation for total despair, but I understand why that sort of situation can make people feel that way. Because it is one in which, I mean, there's no one, I don't care who you are, there's no analyst out there that can, in good faith and objectively, and those two adjectives are important, say that, you know, that like Iran, Hezbollah, Nasrallah, Hamas, that these have not been incredibly restrained, you know,
Yes.
incremental, you know, kind of, you know, forces, right? That they have you know, been attacking legitimate targets. They have been, you know, often going after, you know, military equipment, you know, in some cases, military personnel, etc., right? But not, you know, so I just want to say that, and you know, because it is wild, you know, how it's totally not the case. I mean, the funniest thing yesterday to me, one of the funniest things, was there were two moments that I laughed, and one was when there was a BBC commentator talking about how Iran had attacked Mossad's headquarters, and they said the headquarters is in a very dense populated area, and so you know, this could harm Israeli civilians potentially by accident by targeting this headquarters in the densely populated area, you know. And it was Adam Johnson, actually, from Citations Needed, who was like, oh, so you're saying that Israel uses human shields, and you know, because it's like but so there was that, and then oh, I forgot the other one, but that's okay. But just this point about you know, that these forces, I think, have done an amazing job of trying to sort of be restrained, ethical act, which is very difficult, I think, to do when you are in you know, a military struggle like this, and yeah, and Israel, you know, they don't care about that at all, right? And so I just say that because it totally inverts this you know, the terrorism kind of thing, you know. I mean, there's like nobody in the world is looking at this and thinking like these forces. I mean, it is also the point you were making earlier about like, why do we get, you know, excited when Ansarallah blows up another ship or whatever, you know? It's like these are the ones that are actually doing the things that you should have to do to prevent a genocide, but no nation state, is willing to do. So, yeah.
Can I just give you? I mean, I didn't want to sound like I was not being like pro despair or anything. I wanted to
No.
This is to build on something that you just said about this notion of restraint, though. So there's all this like hype going on, like, oh, Israel invaded, and we're not hearing anything from Hizbu'llah. And there's like, oh, where's Hizbu'llah? They're decapitated. What are they doing? And what we ended up finding out that Israel was just pummeling the hell out of places with like artillery and stuff like that, and creating a lot of smoke. And I was just thinking about how all like, yo, where's Hizbu'llah, right? And what this restraint is, they were just waiting. You know what I mean? That's what I mean by like taking account of your allies, taking account of like understanding that we don't have certain allies, certain places is a good thing, and allows us to build a place where we can trust people. And that's what I mean by also like kind of like falling back into what we know. Like, okay, Hezbollah has been decapitated and da-da-da-da. We all know that Israel's way, more powerful and militarily and all, but also be like, okay, we also know that they whooped their ass in 2006.
They're also a shitty military, really.
We
also know that.
Exactly. You whooped your ass in 2006. And now, as much as the, technology and surveillance and all that sort of stuff has blown up over the past 15 years, Hezbollah is, you don't want to, they're way more skilled in many ways, right? So kind of just thinking about like this idea of restraint, I was thinking about like how much, and they still are, they're just kind of waiting.
Yep.
They're just waiting.
Yeah.
And that's, waiting. And it's that restrained. And it's just like, they're just waiting, and all you have to, Israelis are literally walking into bullets. They don't, they don't have to like, Hezbollah doesn't have to shoot at them. They just shoot, and the Israelis are walking into them, because they could just sit back,
There's I'm trying to find it now. One of his rules actually relates to this, because there's the idea, he's like, it may seem right that the enemy has come into the territory, and that they are, and that they have won, and they've taken over, and they've seized this land, or whatever. And he's like, but this is guerrilla warfare, right? And that
you walk them into a place,
is they come into traps.
Yeah.
And then they, and that's exactly, I mean, I've seen several people reference that in terms of this ground invasion, right? They're going to be allowed to go into certain areas, and that may at times look like, oh man, they've got a victory here. They've done this. And, they're gonna constantly, have a lot.
It's almost like all the surveillance in the world doesn't replace the fact that you're not indigenous to that land, and will never know the crevices and everything you need to know that land well.
Yeah.
I don't know if what level of detail you're hearing, because it's in Arabic news, basically what's happened. And it's funny because the way Arabic news is that you'll hear it one source, and then another source, like Jazeera is like very, very, very careful about reporting stuff. Jazeera Arabi, Jazeera English is like, I mean, you might as well be, I mean, it's super conservative in terms of how it reports stuff. But, I don't know if you had heard like how there's an official recognition by the apartheid state that 8 soldiers and officers, 2 of which were captains, were killed. But apparently there are a number more. And I don't know if you've heard, they were walking at the tunnels, getting blown up. They walked into a building. They got suckered into a building. They blew up. They got 3 tanks because they went in the wrong place. They got a helicopter. This is, by the way, 2-3 hours before we even got on. So I haven't. I was putzing around right now just to see if like the blow by blow, if anything came through after you said. So it's just like precisely what you're saying. I mean, this is what they're fighting in Ras al-Marun right now. Ras al-Marun in 2006 was taken by the Israelis about 17 times. Like, it was one of these things like, today they took it, and then today they took it, and today they took it. And like, that's kind of, I just wanted to, I didn't want to sound like a doom and gloom person. Quite to the contrary, I was saying like to understand like the things that we know are important.
Yeah.
You know?
No, absolutely. And I mean, I try to read mostly people who are translating stuff into English from like Al-Minar or, you know, and then English Mayadeen I read sometimes. And yeah, no, I think that's right. Yeah, is the sort of, I mean, there is the kind of, there's the dictum of like trust the resistance. And, you know, I think that sometimes that can feel, one of the things I want to say about that is that I think I agree with that for the most part. The part that where I sometimes hesitate around it is more that I don't want, and this is something that like Good Shepherd Collective and other folks encourage too, is like, don't just become somebody who just cheers on the resistance from the West and like isn't doing anything else. Like, you know, you don't want to become like kind of a passive consumer of this and that to be your sort of political practice, right, associated with it. And so I do want to encourage people to find still ways that they can engage in practices that either have a material impact locally. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you could have a material impact locally. You know, it could be fundraising, it could be you know, supporting mutual aid efforts, it could be direct action, it could be, you know, organizing with folks that are figuring out what to do on campuses or in whatever. So there's a lot of different things that people can still do, and I think it's important also to resist that like feeling of hopelessness or despair that people continue to do those things, but also to not just abdicate, I guess, our own political responsibility to the resistance, right?
Yes,
that's the thing. Yeah. All right. Let's see. There's a couple comments from the audience I'll pull in.
I hold up there, Lara.
Yeah, we'll let Lara go, actually. Yeah. Oh, this was just a question.
Comments and then
Yeah. Are there any good books you know of on the use of lying in politics and psychological warfare? I really don't.
Yeah, just off the top of my head, and maybe when I wake up in the morning, I'll remember now that.
Yeah.
I don't know that I rely on my recall right now, but I will think right off the top of my head at 12:30. I'm not recalling.
Yeah. We should let Lara go. This question is a good one to ask Dr. Jared Ball, because it's really like kind of a media communications critical study question almost. I mean, I'm sure there are psychological warfare.
There is one. It's not psychological warfare, but it is about lying and manipulation. It's called the political brain, I think, by Political Mind, Political Brain by Drew Weston. And he talks about the failures of the Democratic Party to actually be, like, he's talking about it like the Democrats should manipulate more. And that the reason why Republicans do so well is because they lie and they sort of terrorize and use affect manipulatively, and why it always is a failure, why the Democrats fail, because they rely on reason and that sort of stuff. That's one in the context of the United States, but it's not about psychological warfare.
Yeah. I think we should let's talk to Dr. Jared Ball when we see him he'll be here on Friday, so we can revisit that question too, because he studies through his like critical analysis of mass communications and stuff like that. I mean, the people who designed the media were very clear from the beginning, like that these are tools of psychological warfare, you know, and so I think there probably is some good stuff there. So all right. Well, thank you so much. This has been great, and I know that it is very late where you are, Lara. And this has been great. Thank you for your time. And yeah, free Palestine, and let's get these Zionists out of Lebanon. And yeah, all of it. All right. Thanks so much.
All of it. Thank you. Thanks, folks.
Thank you.